Right, welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. I'm Rufai Hussaini.
I'm Adesula Moran.
And I'm Sheto Atigari. Good morning.
National security refers to the use of economic, diplomatic, power projection and political power to maintain the survival of a state or a country. And it's usually central to all forms of development in a country.
That's correct. Well, presently, the country's democracy, re-established in 1999, is being tested by rampant crime and unprecedented increase in the campaign of terror by different insurgent groups.
In northern Nigeria, the Islamic terrorist group called Boko Haram is still very much around, causing havoc and brutality. In the south, armed gangs are kidnapping expatriates for ransom. And on the long road that connects the south to the north of the country, armed bandits have almost taken over control of the highways and byways, not minding the existence of Nigeria's security forces.
All right. However, what constitutes national security in modern times has always generated critical reactions. Till date, the question has never been answered satisfactorily by both scholars and researchers. So joining us to discuss this topic is about national security in Nigeria is Tanwa Ashiru. She's the founder of Bulwark Security, also formerly of the United States Military Corps.
Yes.
It's a joy talking to you, Tanwa.
Thank you.
Tanwa, let's talk about what really constitutes national security in the light of what is happening this day and age. The commissioner recently came out to say Abuja is safe. 2 days after we have incidents of kidnapping. A lot of people say, yeah, Nigeria is safe. If you heard the show this morning, Senator Adeshe Ogunlewe, I say Nigeria is safe, not the image they paint abroad that it's all Boko Haram and it's all strife, you get killed. It's safe. So what's your take on this?
Well, I mean, we have to ask ourselves, are we happy? The people who are saying it's safe, are they happy with the status quo? And that's one of the issues I have, especially with the leadership. So, for instance, there's a lot of issues going on across the entire nation. And there's something going on called, it's a youth bulge. And this is happening across Africa. There are more and more youth that are across the continent that have nothing to do. Now, what we're currently experiencing here in Nigeria is a case where you have all these young men who have not much to do, and they have no food to eat. And quite frankly, they've been trying to do good. It's not paying them. And so they turn to crime. And it makes sense for them at that point. They're making money. They have weapons. They're making things happen. And that's really what we're experiencing right now. So we can't hide the socioeconomic factor that's also dealing with this or causing this current situation.
But do you think that the leaders, those that run the country or the continent of Africa, are aware of this youth bulge? And do you think they're tackling this youth bulge enough?
I don't think they are. If you see recent videos, for instance, that tend to go viral about the schools across the nation, we see it in other parts of the continent as well. Now, we're still seeing young people who are still not being cultivated and developed and groomed for the corporate world or for the business world going forward. So you're still going to have young people who are growing up and having nothing to do. I don't know if you've seen recently, they've raided some, what they call Islamic schools or something across, and you found a lot of young kids who are shackled. What are they teaching them? Nothing that would be useful for them when they come into the job market. So if you look at that projection, we're still very, very worried about it. But aside from even the young people, now let's even look at the security forces and their ability to respond. There's one thing I believe in, which is nobody can protect a home, a state, than the owners of that home or the people, the residents of that state. And that's one of the reasons why I'm a big proponent for state policing. Why don't you let me protect my state the way I know we can? Because I know this place. And so I can probably do a much better job.
Since we're talking about young people, I wonder what your take is on the repeated attacks on schools. And we've seen that on the increase in recent times. In Kaduna, in the space of 1 week, we had attacks on 2 different schools, and students, staff members, and in another situation, a principal was kidnapped. Is this just kidnapping for ransom on the increase, or do you think that the insurgents are changing MO? What's your take on that situation?
I mean, they've always targeted schools, and we have to look at it this way. There's something called a soft target and a hard target. Now, these same insurgents or thieves or robbers will not go to, like, an American embassy, for instance. Why? Because it's armed to the T in terms of security levels. You're talking about guards, gates, fences, cameras, and the ability to respond. So if something is going on, you best believe that they will make a call, and within a couple of minutes, there will be security response. Now, let's now take it to local schools, especially schools that are being attacked. what you find is that they're quite isolated. They don't have any ability for anyone to respond to them if there is an issue. What are their gates like? I remember a time we had to do an assessment of a school, and we went there. I mean, the gates were falling apart. People were walking in and out of the school.
No fences.
No fences. In fact, broken fences, which students often take advantage of. The fences are broken. There's a hole in the wall. Everyone gets out and then comes back in when they need to. And these are things that expose them. So when you have structures like that, we call them soft targets. It only makes sense. If I'm a rubber and I see two homes, there's a home with a gate, there's a home without a gate, and I need to choose one, I'll go for the easier one. And unfortunately, a lot of our schools these days are soft targets because they either don't have the funds or the resources, or they're not even being hammered by the state and the government to protect themselves and make sure that security is in place.
Okay, so let's, there's no way we can talk about insecurity and insurgency in Nigeria and not talk about the Boko Haram group. Now, very recently, our budget for 2020 was released, and a speaker for the House of Representatives, Mr. Ndume, came forward and said of a budget of 10.3 million naira, we are looking at 1%.
That was a trillion naira.
Trillion naira, sorry. We're looking at 1% that has been allocated to security. His statement, his response to that was, we're not serious. What do you think about the budget funding? Because we know that some of these police officers need to upgrade their equipment. They need to, like you said, response time. For them to respond on time, they need to have their vehicles in place. They need to have their comms in place. What do you think regarding the budget in regards to security?
So here's the thing. This Boko Haram insurgency is about to clock 10 years. I hope we know. We've been a decade into this. I don't know if we're not learning. I don't know what the issue is. Now, here's something we need to really keep in mind. It's not about the amount of money that's being poured into it. In fact, over the last 10 years since we had that insurgency, the amount of money budgeted towards security in the country has quadrupled. But yet we're still seeing attacks. So we should all take a step back and ask ourselves, perhaps it's not really about the amount of money that's being put into it, but is there accountability? Is the money being used for what we are earmarking it for? Trust me, I mean, I run a security company, a consulting company. We consult, for different strata of, both private sector and public sector. And I know what we have to deal with when we're coming with proper solutions. And you still have to deal with sharks and vultures who are trying to be all over it. I mean, so there's a delicate dance. And what I would like to see more of, instead of the senator say, no, we're not serious because it's only 1%. Quite frankly, if you ask me, I think we need to allocate a lot more money towards education than even we are, putting towards security. But what they also need to do is make sure that there are accountability structures, things in place. We see videos all the time of soldiers, troops on the ground complaining about the sort of vehicles they have. So in essence, I'm paying a lot of money that should get me really high quality, high grade equipment and vehicles and tools. But yet, when it comes to the field, I'm getting very low quality. And sometimes that's because, the consultant or the manufacturer, whoever, has had to scale back a little because of other pressures that are around him. So these are things that we need to keep in mind and where I think Senate needs to be focusing their attention.
So I wonder what your take is on the new strategy announced by the military, and they're talking about deployment of helicopters, fighter helicopters. There's the super camp that was just introduced in July, and that has come under a lot of criticisms. In fact, the governor of Borno State says it is defective. What's your take on super camps and the new announced strategy of the military? Is this working at cross purposes with the Air Force, who also has fighter jets?
So that's the whole idea. And to be honest, I almost feel for the military because if they go left, I mean, people would criticize them. If they go right, they're criticized. So at the end of the day, they really just have to do what they think is best. Now, let me tell you where super camps came from. I don't know if you noticed, but Boko Haram or ISWAP, and we had switched their strategy. Mm-hmm. And what they started doing was attacking the smaller FOBs. FOBs are forward operating bases. So they're the smaller, positions where you put the troops. So they started attacking them because they felt that their defenses were a lot lower, and obviously they're more vulnerable because there are fewer troops. So in response to that, the military said, you know what, let's go ahead and pull back. And what we're going to do is set up a more structured, well-defended base, which has now been dubbed, super camp. And so instead, we're going to pull the troops in here. And if there are any attacks in the community, we'll be able to come out and respond. And if they try to attack us, I mean, clearly, we have the Air Force, we have other people, it will probably be a joint base. And so we'll be able to respond adequately. And that's the whole idea. Now, the fallout with that decision was that once they pulled the troops away from these FOBs, they left vacancies across the communities. So then you have Boko Haram or ISWAP that would come, the insurgents would come and realize, oh, there's no security presence
Free
here.
for all.
Exactly. So now we're back in charge, and then they're now telling the villagers, you know what, don't worry, we're the good guys, okay? We're not going to kill you. We're actually here to fight the military. And so you're looking at an average villager or community member that's thinking, you know what, I'm just trying to live. So if this guy is saying he's not going to kill me, yes, I will just listen to him. So where he would have been inclined to share information, share intel with the troops, he may not be able to do that, because if he does that, next thing at night, he's going to have someone knocking on his door, and it's not security, it would be the insurgents. So that has been the fallout, and this is why they're getting criticisms with the super camp. What I think the better strategy should have been is that while they took people, their troops away from the FOBs, perhaps they could have worked pretty closely with the Civilian Joint Task Force, so the vigilantes, the state guys at the end of the day, and saying, you know what, let's go ahead and put you in these FOBs, okay? This is how you communicate. Try and get intel from the community members, because you're down there, you're closer to them, number one. Number two, if there's an issue, this is how you communicate. We'll be able to respond. We'll call, if you have an issue, call for backup. We'll be able to help there in the communities.
I just quickly want to take you on this. You have a grounded knowledge in intel. I mean, you did you did work with the military forces in America as regards intel, and you have a great understanding of this. The use of civilians in this war, when it first started, it was really effective, but there was a trend where the civilian JTF started to join the military. And when they were co-opted into the military, it looks as though that strategy wasn't working any longer. I mean, how can we use intel to make sure that we have a civilian army in that area?
Okay, so you can't necessarily have a civilian army, because then that would...
No, civilian army in the sense that people that will give the military adequate information, that will work in consonance with the military, that will be on the military side, but without them being pointed out as civilian JTF. So like infiltrating these people.
Well, yes, no, and this is clearly, this is part of military operations, it's part of, defense intelligence operations, and I'm sure they may have some networks. So that's pretty much what you're talking, maybe informant networks and things like that. They may have that in place. But yes, you're right, it may not be to the extent that we feel it should be, which is we probably should have some people who are within the insurgent ranks who are able to actually directly feed back information to the military. So that's completely different. I mean, that's obviously that has more to do with military operations. Now, with regards to civilians and even the Civilian Joint Task Force, for instance, which is vigilantes, now they took basically hunters, right, and said, well, you guys have guns, you're familiar with the forest and so on. Why don't you work alongside us? In essence, we're going to do patrols. Let's patrol together, which makes sense because they understand the terrain, they understand the culture, they understand local peculiarities. And that's what was initially started. Now, over time, there have been some complaints. Some locals have started complaining that these same civilian, Joint Task Force people or vigilantes were starting to do some abuse. There were some allegations of abuses and things like that. So again, when you're doing these things, you must understand the current scenario and the situation. Okay, understand that once you put a weapon, in a man's hands, at some point, exactly. Or
we'll take your thoughts for after the break. We'll be right back to talk more to Tanwa.
Welcome back to Arise News. We are still having the conversation about Nigeria's national security with Tanwa Ashiru, the founder of Bulwark Intelligence. Now, let's talk numbers. As of 2019, we have 370,000 policemen to 200 million people. However, if we look at a country like Egypt, that has 80 million people, they have 1 million police officers. Now, looking at those numbers, that doesn't make any sense because they will not be able to efficiently police the people. Why do you think we're still lacking behind the numbers? Why do you think people are still not going to... The police force is not considered a job that people want to necessarily apply for?
I mean, and to be honest, it's really, really bad with the way the situation is. I think there's a lot of politics at play here. And if you think, recently there was an article that said the PSE was having a lot of issues in recruiting just the 10,000 that they've promised to bring on board for the last how many, years. So there's a lot of politics at play. Again, this is where I would like to just have everybody take a step back and let's just agree to disagree that the current status or situation of the current strategy may not be working, which is having a federal police force and then deploying people and making sure that everything is done just from there. How about we start looking into individual states that can do it? Now, it's called state policing. There are a lot of debates back and forth. And what I tell people about these debates is, let's not debate the fact that it won't work. We know anything can fail. That's fine. How about we start the debate with, okay, hypothetically speaking, if this were to work, how would we do it? And let's start steering that conversation in that aspect. Absolutely. Before you start any strategy, you'd look at the pros and cons.
But a lot of people will say it's already in the works. Take, for instance, Lagos State has a neighborhood security watch.
Yeah.
We've got NSCDC. NSCDC actually was a fallout of the Civil War. In fact, there were those that were supposed to keep people calm, safety and security, concerns. So, and afterwards, they metamorphosed into arm-carrying institutions and the like. So a lot of people will say, we have multiplicity of forces that carry arm. The customs carry arm. Can't we just, align them and sort of create like a covalent bond between them to come together and work as regards this? No,
so some of the issues, I remember, Lagos State, for instance, has something called the Lagos State Security Trust Fund. And the reason why it seems like Lagos State Security tends to be, pretty in tip-top shape compared to the rest of the country is because they have some funds which stem from this trust fund. But when I was in one of the meetings and, we heard the CP at the time who was explaining it, said, look, that each police station gets 33,000 naira per month to operate. Exactly. And I don't know about
33,000
yes.
a month.
Yes. How are they supposed to do anything? And that's the allocation that they get. And I remember it was interesting because when he said it, there was a police officer sitting next to me, and then he leaned over and he was like, it's not true. I was like, hey, that doesn't make it. Can't be true. He said, it's 31,000. Oh my goodness. So,
31.
And, so these are the challenges. So sometimes when we tell ourselves that, where are all the policemen? How come we don't have enough? It's quite frankly because the funds really are not there. And that's why national, I don't know if you saw it, but the president recently approved for them to start looking into this police trust fund, which is pretty much forcing money out of everyone across the country and saying that let's use that to fund the police forces. So sometimes that's really where the challenge is that they don't have enough resources to get as many people as they need.
What should be the priority? Because you've said earlier that, increased funds doesn't necessarily translate to solving the problem.
Yes.
You've also talked about strategy, overhauling strategy. But what should be the priority? How much of technology are we deploying to fight this emerging threat of security as a country? I mean, you've said Boko Haram fight is about 10 years. Yes. Where do we go from here?
So I personally feel that you need to look more at states. I don't know if you read about this as well, but the Borno State governor is also now looking into, let's go ahead and bring these vigilantes back. They're part of the state's security structure and let them now be actively involved in this fight. So that's them recognizing that, look, at the end of the day, we, the people of Borno, have to take security into our hands. Yes, we accept the help from federal, but let's see what we can do. Number two, about states that are somewhat getting it right, like Lagos State. And what you'll find with Lagos, for instance, is that they're able to get this additional fund. They took a bucket, went to everyone, the banks, everybody, and said, look, it's in all of our interests that Lagos is safe. And they got additional funds to make that happen. So we have to look at what Lagos is doing. Lagos is also trying, for instance, to adopt the use of technology. I'm a big proponent of the use of technology in security. Because even till today, I don't know, if you travel abroad, you don't necessarily see policemen everywhere. But that if an incident occurs right now, you will find them come out and they will know what's going on. Not only do they have the CCTV, but even the ability for citizens to call in and report a situation, which is something that Lagos State has with the Emergency Management Agency. There's a 3-digit number here. We can call it in. Do you know that even in Borno today, they don't have a 3-digit number? That means that if it's in the middle of the night and there's a...
Can we call a 3-digit number?
Yes, you can.
What's it?
767 and 112.
And it's still free?
It's still functional.
It's still free.
And you know what? So here's a crazy thing about it. If you actually forget and you just remember Hollywood and you remember 911, you dial 911, it'll tell you, welcome to Alausa call center. So it actually still will connect you there. Yes. But the state has had to do it on their own. Now, we're finding some other states are trying to adopt the same thing. But today, 10 years later in an insurgency, in the area that's dealing with it, they don't have a 3-digit number. So that means in the middle of an attack at night, I have to start remembering 080 and other, 10 digits. And so it's not, we really need to get serious
let's talk about, okay.
Because I have a follow-up here. For every state, there's a different security threat.
Yes.
While we can emulate Lagos, we see some states, for instance, in the Northwest, about 3 or 4 of them at the last count, who have now decided to negotiate with bandits. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. So there was also a commission report that came out that indicted a lot of the leadership and a lot of emirs and some government officials in, I think, the same Zamfara that were involved in one way or the other in promoting this insecurity that has to do with bandits. Now, when we're talking about banditry and what's going on in the Northwest, we're also looking at a border issue. The borders up north is just something completely different, number one. Number two, forests. The forests, which, forest reserves, should be some form of, economic power somehow for us. We haven't figured out a proper way of patrolling the forests or checking them, making sure that it's not a hibernation or a haven for these bandits, but which is what we've been seeing. So when we're looking, and then there was the issue of the illegal mining as well. Now, banditry, I don't know if you've seen any of the videos when they come in, they come in on these motorcycles. It's bulk, a group of like 30, 40, 50 of them will come in at a time, drive into a town or a city, do whatever it is they're doing and leave. Brings us back to the same situation, which is there's not enough oversight. Where are the government officials? Where's the policemen? Where's the NSCDC? Where's the military when they're coming in like this? Is anyone or is nobody actually seeing this? So that, for me, especially with an intel background, this is all intel is about, surveillance, reconnaissance. You understand where the hotspots are. You understand the trends, the patterns, right? They come in huge motorcycle and tactics. Ask the locals, around what time do you think this usually happens? And then you may find that there's a pattern. And at that point, you can strategically focus your resources and your forces to try to counter the threat around that time.
Okay, sorry, you could ask a question.
Yeah, because it's a follow-up to this. Do you think that the problem here is information sharing among agencies? Because even when we're looking at the 9/11 attacks, for example, the U.S. government later found out that different agencies had ideas of what was going on, but because they had not come together to look at it as a whole puzzle, they weren't able to figure it out. Do you think that's the problem here, that our agencies are not communicating with each other?
That is one of the problems, and it's definitely a major problem that's affecting operations. Because at the end of the day, I think if everyone was able to actually lay out their books, you'll find out that the DSS, for instance, has a lot of information, or, the military has even more information, and the state. What about Borno State? What about the Vigilance? So are there mechanisms that you've put into place to ensure that everyone is communicating together? Which is one of the things that the U.S. did. They came up with the National Counterterrorism Center and Homeland Security, things that kind of forced people to be co-located together and forced them to have meetings together and share information together.
I just quickly want to take you about this vigilante issue. Because we have used them, they have been successful in some regard. In fact, some people are saying the best way to start a state police force is to use the vigilante. But we remember the antecedents of how they get power drunk and they go overboard. You remember the Bakassi boys of 2000. They stemmed the tide of insecurity. Onitsha was a hotbed for armed robbery. The Bakassi boy came in, you dare not do it. Although People's Congress too in this area. Ethnic militias like that. But how do we nip them in the bud? And the big elephant in the room, kidnapping, it has started, it is rife, it is everywhere all over again. It is hitting the Federal Capital Territory.
Yes, kidnapping is a major issue. But first, now with what you're talking about, this is always a threat when you decide that you're going to take a local ethnic group or a local militia or a local vigilante group and saying that you guys are in charge of security. This is why states, which when I say states as well, I mean the nation. So the nation state tends to want to keep control of that. It makes absolute perfect sense. However, though, let's try and figure out. It's about putting structures in place. Okay, so even if you're going to come and bring in security, and you're calling yourself Bakassi boys, for example, and you want to do that, that's fine. But there has to be some limitations, some checks, balances, oversights, accountability. Things that you're putting in place to make sure that, you're going to transition from this to eventually being more of a structured force. And then from that, now putting oversight and measures and things in place. So you don't just allow things to evolve by themselves. You must have controls that you put in.
Kidnapping.
Now, this kidnapping situation, clearly, it's just...
do you? I know you do a lot of stats. I mean, that's a part of you we never brought on this, but maybe in subsequent interviews. I mean, do you have the stats, the highest prevalence in the country? Quickly, I mean, just.
I can tell you this for a fact: nobody has 100% of the stats, which is our first problem. Because when there is a kidnapping situation, you either have locals who are like, you know what, I'm sorry, but I'm not calling any police because the guy has told me if I do that, they're going to kill the person I'm with. But, you know, there should be a mechanism by which people can at least call secretly, you know, report it, and then it goes out there. But one of the issues, especially with regards to stats, again, is that sometimes, even when the stats are given, for instance, to the local police command, they may not want to present those exact stats to their higher-ups, because then it makes them
inefficient.
Look like they're inefficient. So we've been trying to, and I know that the police force has been trying to do this, the higher-ups, trying to encourage them and tell them, look, it's not going to make you look bad, but you really need to let us know what the real stats are so that we can put in the appropriate measures and put that in place. So that's one of the main issues with kidnapping, the stats. And
a very big thank you to you. Thank you so much, Tanwa, for coming on a very short notice. But definitely we'll still always have you here.
Definitely.